Naomi Takeda was a graceful, soft-spoken wife living in a quiet corner of Kanazawa. Hiroshi Takeda, her devoted husband, was known for his discipline, kindness, and predictability. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple until Hiroshi was found dead in the bathtub of their immaculate home. What looked like a tragic household accident soon unraveled into a chilling web of betrayal, obsession, and cold-blooded murder. Behind Naomi's calm smile was a secret life, a forbidden affair, and a deadly plan that would shock an entire nation. Hiroshi Takeda lived a quiet, predictable life in the coastal city of Kanazawa. His days followed a strict routine: wake up at 6:30 a.m., shower, iron his shirt, eat a small breakfast of rice and miso soup, and catch the same train to his office job downtown. At 42 years old, Hiroshi was the kind of man who didn't like surprises. His world was built on structure and discipline, and he found comfort in the familiar. His neighbors admired him. He was polite, dependable, and always ready to lend a hand. To the outside world, he had everything: a steady job, a neat home, and a beautiful wife who kept things in order. Naomi Takeda was 38, graceful, quiet, and always composed. She had met Hiroshi through an arranged introduction nearly a decade earlier. At first, their marriage was peaceful, even pleasant. But over the years, a slow, invisible distance had formed between them. Hiroshi worked long hours and spoke little at home. He believed providing financial security was the most important thing he could offer. Naomi, on the other hand, longed for emotional connection. She spent her days alone, tending to the house, cooking simple meals, and keeping everything spotless. But inside, she felt like a shadow drifting through someone else's life. Friends rarely visited. The Takeda home was quiet, almost too quiet. Even the way they sat at the dinner table, eating silently, the soft ticking of the clock filling the air, felt more like two strangers sharing space than a husband and wife. Hiroshi didn't notice the silence. For him, it was peaceful. For Naomi, it became unbearable. She started spending time in the local shopping district, walking through stores she didn't need to visit, just to feel a little less invisible. Occasionally, she sat at a small cafe near the station and watched people pass by. She envied the younger women who laughed with their partners, the older couples holding hands, even the students arguing over their homework. They all seemed to have something she didn't. At night, Hiroshi read the newspaper and went to bed early. Naomi stared at the ceiling. Her thoughts grew louder with each passing day. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even sad. She simply felt hollow, like a character in a play she hadn't chosen to perform. The walls of their neat little home began to feel like a cage. What no one knew was that Naomi had once been in love. Years before she met Hiroshi, she had fallen for someone younger, wilder, and completely unlike the man she married. That relationship had ended in heartbreak, and she had tried to bury it under the layers of her new life. But the memory never truly died. It waited, silent, until a spark reignited it. Everything about the Takeda household looked perfect from the outside. But perfection is often a mask, and behind it, Naomi's dissatisfaction was growing into something far more dangerous. In a town where nothing ever happened, something was about to break. And no one, not even Hiroshi, would see it coming. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when Naomi first saw him again. She hadn't planned it. She had simply ducked into a bar to avoid the sudden downpour, the kind of place she usually passed without a second glance. The warm lighting, low chatter, and scent of alcohol offered a strange comfort. And behind the counter stood Daiki Sakamoto, tall, relaxed, with a boyish face and a quiet confidence that hadn't changed since she last saw him years ago. He noticed her immediately. The recognition flashed in his eyes before he smiled and welcomed her in, as if no time had passed. Naomi had once dated Daiki's older brother, back in her 20s. It had ended badly, and she hadn't expected to see any of the Sakamoto family again. But Daiki had always been different. He had admired her from a distance even back then, the younger brother lingering around the edges of her life. Now he was a man, and Naomi found herself drawn to him in a way she hadn't expected. Their conversation was casual at first, small talk about the weather, memories of the past. But beneath the surface, something stirred. She hadn't felt this kind of attention in years. That one chance meeting turned into a pattern. Naomi began to visit the bar regularly, always during quiet hours when the crowd was thin and Daiki had time to talk. She told herself it was harmless, just someone to talk to, a distraction from the silence of her home. But deep down, she knew it was more. Daiki listened. He laughed at her jokes. He noticed when she changed her hairstyle. Every glance, every compliment, chipped away at the emotional walls she had built over the years. What began as friendly became secretive. They started meeting outside the bar, quiet cafes, riverside walks, hidden corners of the city. Naomi felt alive again, like she had stepped out of a dream and into color. With Daiki, she wasn't just Hiroshi's wife. She was wanted, desired, important. And Daiki, caught in the intensity of their secret meetings, fell deeper under her spell. He believed her when she said she was trapped. He believed her when she described her marriage as loveless, cold, and lonely. Naomi never said it directly, but her words carried an unspoken message. If only Hiroshi wasn't there, everything would be better. Daiki began to imagine a life with her, freedom, love, maybe even a fresh start somewhere far away. What he didn't realize was that Naomi wasn't simply venting. She was planting ideas, slowly, carefully. She knew how to manipulate with softness. How to play the role of victim and savior at once. Their meetings became more frequent, more intense. They exchanged messages at all hours. And as their connection grew, so did the danger. Naomi had crossed a line she could never step back from. She wasn't just having an affair. She was building something far more destructive, something that would end with blood, betrayal, and a husband who would never see it coming. The affair had shifted from thrilling to consuming. Naomi and Daiki were no longer just sneaking moments, they were building a private world, one that existed outside the bounds of reality. They spoke in code through text messages, met in the dim corners of the city, and imagined a life that didn't include Hiroshi. For Naomi, it wasn't just about love anymore. It was about escape. About tearing away the dull layers of her life and stepping into something reckless and wild. And for Daiki, who had never known a love this intense, it became an obsession. He believed Naomi needed saving, and he was the only one who could do it. Naomi began feeding him information about Hiroshi's daily habits. What time he left for work. When he arrived home. Where he kept his house key. What medicines he used. She made it seem innocent, like offhanded remarks during their conversations. But Daiki remembered every word. In his mind, it was preparation, not for murder, but for a future where Hiroshi was simply gone. The idea started small, almost abstract. But day by day, it grew sharper, more real. One afternoon, Naomi handed Daiki a small, folded piece of paper tucked inside a book. Inside it was a list, times, locations, instructions. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, she had written, "You know what this means." Daiki didn't ask questions. He felt chosen, empowered, loved. She gave him something else that day, too, a small plastic bag filled with crushed sleeping pills. For stress, she said casually, but her eyes told a different story. It was no longer a fantasy. They were moving forward, and Hiroshi's fate was quietly being sealed. Naomi's plan was subtle, careful. She didn't want a scene. No violence. Just a quiet end. Something that looked like an accident. She would play the grieving wife, and Daiki would disappear for a while until the dust settled. They talked about moving to a new city. Maybe even a different country. Naomi spoke of beaches and fresh starts. Daiki soaked up every word, convinced this was love worth sacrificing for. The plan was simple. Naomi would mix the crushed pills into Hiroshi's tea on a weekend when he stayed home. Once he was unconscious, she'd carry him to the bathtub, fill it with warm water, and leave him there. It would look like he'd slipped, hit his head, and drowned. No one would question it. Hiroshi had no known enemies, no drama. Just a quiet man in a quiet life, suddenly gone, but as the plan formed, cracks began to show. Daiki grew nervous. He asked Naomi if she was sure. She always answered with a soft nod and a reassuring touch. Her calm was chilling, even to him. She had rehearsed it all in her mind, down to the moment she would call emergency services in tears. It would be believable. Tragic. Clean. What Daiki didn't realize was that Naomi wasn't just desperate, she was calculating. Every move, every word, was designed to protect herself. In her mind, if anything went wrong, Daiki would take the fall. And if everything went right, she'd be free. The plan was in motion. And there was no turning back. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Naomi made the call. Her voice trembled as she told emergency services that she had found her husband unconscious in the bathtub. The paramedics arrived within minutes, followed by police officers. The scene appeared tragic but ordinary. Hiroshi lay lifeless in a half-filled tub, the water cooled and still. A faint bruise marked his right temple, and there were no signs of struggle or forced entry. Naomi sat wrapped in a blanket, her eyes red from tears, whispering that he must have slipped and hit his head. To everyone present, it looked like a heartbreaking domestic accident. At first, the investigation followed routine procedure. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy as a formality. Hiroshi, after all, was only 42 and in good health. But as the report came back, it raised subtle but significant concerns. Hiroshi had high levels of a sedative in his bloodstream, a drug that wasn't prescribed to him and that would have made it nearly impossible for him to remain conscious. The bruise on his temple was shallow, not forceful enough to suggest a fall that would render him unconscious. More importantly, his lungs showed signs of drowning while unconscious. These findings quietly shifted the case from accident to possible foul play. Detectives returned to the Takeda home for a second look. This time, they weren't just observing the scene, they were searching for answers. The floor was clean, too. Clean, as if it had been wiped down. The cup Hiroshi had used for his morning tea was in the sink, but tests later confirmed traces of the same sedative. Naomi explained everything with calm sorrow, never faltering in her story. She claimed they had been distant, but not unhappy. She said Hiroshi was tired from work, and maybe the stress had affected him more than she realized. Then came the slip, a seemingly minor detail that turned the tide. Naomi mentioned Hiroshi taking a bath in the morning, a habit no one close to him could confirm. His routine was exact, and he never bathed in the morning. It was always at night. Investigators noted the inconsistency and began reviewing security footage from nearby street cameras. That's when they spotted Naomi leaving the house late the night before, her face partially covered, heading toward a neighborhood several miles away. She returned hours later. The route she took led directly to the area where Daiki Sakamoto lived. Digging deeper, they obtained phone records and discovered a long trail of messages between Naomi and Daiki. Hundreds of texts deleted, call logs, and vague references to starting over. One message stood out: it has to look natural. You know what to do. When police located Daiki and brought him in for questioning, his calm demeanor vanished. Faced with mounting evidence, he began to crack. His story shifted multiple times. Before he finally admitted there had been a plan, the story had changed. What appeared to be a tragic accident was now a murder staged to look like a slip and fall. The quiet, unassuming life of Hiroshi Takeda had ended not by misfortune, but by design. And behind the veil of mourning, Naomi's secrets were starting to unravel. Daiki's confession was the final crack that shattered the image Naomi had built. Under pressure, he told investigators everything. He spoke of the affair, the long emotional manipulation, the drug tea, and the plan Naomi had crafted down to the finest detail. He claimed he never physically hurt Hiroshi himself, but he knew exactly what Naomi intended to do that morning. His guilt was clear. He had helped her, knowing the outcome would be deadly. But he insisted that Naomi was the mastermind, the one who had planted the idea, fed it daily, and made it feel like love. As detectives pieced the story together, they found more disturbing details. In Daiki's apartment, they discovered a notebook hidden beneath a drawer. Its pages were filled with messy writing, time logs, and Naomi's words written verbatim. One entry read, "He's too stubborn to let go. We'll have to help." Another read, "Bath. Quiet. No marks. No trace." These weren't just fantasies, they were blueprints for murder. Naomi, when confronted with Daiki's confession and the evidence, denied everything. Her composure never cracked. She claimed Daiki had become obsessed and acted alone. She said she had been frightened of him, tried to end the affair, and that he had retaliated by targeting her husband. But the jury didn't believe her. The messages, the handwritten list, the sedative traces, and the timeline all pointed to her as the architect of the crime. During the trial, a new revelation surfaced, one that stunned even the investigators. Years before marrying Hiroshi, Naomi had been in a serious relationship with Daiki's older brother, a man named Kenta Sakamoto. That relationship had ended after Kenta abruptly left the country following a family scandal. It seemed unrelated at first, but when police reviewed Naomi's old phone data, they found messages from Kenta that suggested Naomi had been emotionally unstable even back then. One message read, "You twist everything. You scare me." It painted a different picture of Naomi, not as a quiet, unhappy wife, but as someone capable of manipulation long before Hiroshi ever came into her life. The court proceedings gripped the nation. Media outlets dubbed it the bathtub affair. And neighbors who had once admired Naomi's quiet grace now questioned how well they had ever known her. She was sentenced to life in prison for orchestrating the murder. Daiki, who was considered a manipulated accomplice but still complicit, was sentenced to 20 years. Hiroshi's family, devastated and blindsided, held a small, private memorial. They had never imagined such darkness behind the quiet walls of his home. His only mistake had been loving someone who wore a mask too well. In the end, Naomi didn't get the freedom she had craved. Her plan, built on whispers and shadows, collapsed under the weight of truth. And what began as a lonely woman's secret longing had spiraled into a cold, calculated crime that ended a life, destroyed another, and left a scar on everyone who had believed in the illusion of a perfect marriage. Plan was in motion. And there was no turning back.